to the Jenny Beth Show.
Sheridan Gorman was a Loyola University student who is dead because of a Venezuelan illegal alien who was caught and released by the Biden administration, walked free in the city of Chicago, while Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker and Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson ran their sanctuary city like a shield for criminals. Today, we're going to tell you exactly what happened to Sheridan Gorman. My guest, BETH BRELJE, wrote a piece about how crime from Chicago is spilling over into Wisconsin. Also, inside the United States Supreme Court yesterday, history was made. The president, a sitting president, walked into the chamber and watched the justices debate his own executive order. The case is Trump versus Barbara, and the question before the court is whether the 14th Amendment means what the left says it means. Noah Wall would discuss the case and his new coalition, Mass Deportation Coalition. And we're back with another round with Rachel Bovard. If you were with us on Monday, you heard Cleta Mitchell dissect the Save America Act fight in the Senate. Today, we're going deeper because the DHS shutdown deal has split ICE and Customs and Border Patrol off into a reconciliation track with a June 1st deadline. Rachel is going to tell us honestly, is that deadline real or is it a trap? And then there's last night. President Trump addressed the nation from the Oval Office. Operation Epic Fury, our military operation against the Iranian regime, has been executed with overwhelming force. President Trump expects to wrap it up in a matter of weeks, not months. Last night, President Trump reminded Americans once again the objectives of the military operation: destroy the regime's deadly ballistic missiles and completely raze their missile industry to the ground. And ballistic missile attacks and drone strikes from Iran are down 90%. We have struck over 11,000 targets, and we have damaged or destroyed over 2/3 of Iranian missiles. We also have harmed their naval production facilities and shipyards. The second objective ties right to that: annihilate the Iranian regime's navy. So far, we have destroyed or sunk more than 150 Iranian vessels and destroyed 92% of their vessels. President Trump clearly explained that our military remains laser focused on eliminating the regime's threat to the free flow of energy through the Strait of Hormuz. Objective 3, ensure the regime's terrorist proxies can no longer destabilize the region or the free world and attack our armed forces. So far, Iran's proxies are hardly putting up a fight. Objective 4, guarantee that Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. President Trump has been unequivocal and consistent for decades, including at a Tea Party Patriots rally against the Iran deal in 2015. Iran will never be permitted to obtain a nuclear weapon. If you did not check out President Trump's speech, please do so sometime today. You need to hear the update directly from our commander-in-chief. And finally, as we've been tracking all week, because this is America and we do nothing small, 4 American astronauts are rocketing through space further from Earth than any human beings in history. Artemis 2. Under President Trump, America never rests, and in our quest for greatness, we reach for the stars at the same time. Today, we cover all of these items. Let's go. BETH BRELJE joins me now. She is a senior political investigator at Restoration News and wrote the piece with a different angle on crimes committed by illegal immigrants. Beth, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jenny Beth, it's a privilege to be here.
So set the scene for our viewers. What is happening in Wisconsin right now that the national press is not covering?
Well, after the terrible shooting death of Sheridan Gorman, the Kenosha County District Attorney put out just a social media post saying, hey, here in Wisconsin, we're seeing a lot of spillover of Illinois crime, which, you know, any state that's bordering Illinois would probably say that. But It happens that Kenosha County is right on the Wisconsin-Illinois border. And he says in his social media post that we're going to take this crimes of illegal aliens very seriously. We will work with ICE. I mean, he indicates that through his post, but he suggests, or he full on says, there's a problem in that what's happening in Illinois doesn't stay in Illinois. And it really just means that sanctuary cities and sanctuary states are terrible neighbors because we're talking about people who've already jumped borders to come, to the United States. They're not going to just stay in their own place. They're going to go wherever opportunity is best. So as crime takes root in the blue sanctuary areas, they're going to go to nicer areas like Wisconsin and continue bad acts.
So, will you break down for everyone what happened exactly to Sheridan Gorman?
Sure. Sheridan, as further proof that bad things happen to people who don't necessarily live in a sanctuary region. She was a college student. She attended Loyola University, which is in Chicago, but her hometown was Yorktown, New York. So she had just graduated high school the previous year, and she was wrapping up her freshman year at college. She and her friends had gone out to a Lakeview Park around 1 o'clock in the morning. They were walking out there to see the beautiful northern lights that they heard could be viewed, kind of rarely that far south, but they were hoping to see some that night, and just out on a walk, and they're confronted by a man with a mask and a gun who they tried to run, and Sheridan didn't get away. He shot her in the head, and allegedly the man who shot her is an illegal alien, and one who had been, who had met with public officials twice before. Once when he entered the United States, there he is, Jose Medina. He entered the United States and was picked up by Border Patrol and let go back in 2023. And then he did some shoplifting, released the same day he was picked up for the shoplifting. And as they say, the district attorney in Wisconsin says in his social media post, those small crimes like that are indicators of bigger crimes. So we want to punish for the small crimes. Just this week, we've had a guy in North Carolina who not an illegal immigrant as far as we know, but he had been picked up for a lot of minor crimes. And then he was speeding and hit an 8-year-old girl on a bike and killed her, allegedly. And he got $1,000 bail. He was in and out of custody in no time, because $1,000 bail is nothing. So we're either being really light on crime, or we need to take these smaller crimes seriously before they become life and death issues. Because what we told Mr. Medina was, come into our country illegally, nothing bad will happen to you. Do some shoplifting, nothing bad will happen to you. Live in the shadows in our country. If you're an illegal immigrant, there's not a lot you can legally do. You certainly aren't supposed to vote. You're not supposed to work without the right documentation. You're not supposed to be able to get housing. How does one live without housing and food and money? You have to live in the shadows, which means that you're going to have to break some laws. So he got really used to breaking laws.
Yeah, when you say it's okay to break one law after another, people begin to think that the laws don't matter. And that was the message that was being sent to him. And that's what happens in these so-called sanctuary cities. They are essentially giving amnesty for illegal behavior to people. And it doesn't wind up being a sanctuary, certainly for the victims of crime in those areas. So a lot of it is preventable, and yet it's not. And Governor Pritzker and Mayor Brandon Johnson are still defending the sanctuary policy after Sheridan's death. What is your response? Is there any accountability coming, or do these deaths and the crime not matter to them?
They welcome it because a couple of reasons, I think. They don't value life. These are the people that love abortion. They don't care about victims. I think they want to stoke civil unrest by letting criminals run free and being very light on criminals and not caring what happens to victims. It's not about the victims. That's why, it's a problem that it's spreading to places beyond the sanctuary by design, because they want to destabilize our country. They want people to, they want their people to be able to vote. They want to stoke discomfort. They want to get to a point where people say something has to be done. But for people to be moved to say that, they need to be desperate. And if maybe enough people die, people will get desperate enough to say something needs to be done, and then they'll swoop in with some crazy laws, which is really in some ways already happened. They're just slowly chipping away at a culture that we love by bringing in people and letting them speak their own language and never asking them to assimilate, allowing them to break rules, and just saying, hey, we should care about what happens to the immigrant or illegal immigrant, but I'm not so interested in what happens to the victim.
Beth, in your article that you wrote, this is my last question for you. Explain what this group Welcoming America Inc. is, and what is a welcoming city? That was new to me, something that I learned reading your article.
I think, we're all familiar with the term sanctuary city, but far fewer people are familiar with a welcoming city. There are at least 44 welcoming cities in the United States. Welcoming Inc. is a nonprofit that wants to get cities to become certified welcoming cities, which is a code word for sanctuary city. And to be a welcoming city, they want all residents, including immigrants, to be able to fully participate in civic life. That means they want the government to provide interpreters, and they want illegal immigrants to get free services like free SNAP benefits and housing, the Section 8 and stuff. And they want them to be able to vote. This is written on their website. If you look at, what does it mean to be a certified welcoming city? They want all residents, including immigrants, to participate fully in the economy, which means programs to support immigrant businesses. I'm just reading some of the stuff here from their website. And then they want to ensure local services are accessible. They want government and police departments to have full-time staff positions responsible for advancing immigrant inclusion. They talk about this inclusion like we're a bunch of bigots that don't love immigrants. Well, we love immigrants that came here through a door, through legal means. And yes, our immigration system does need to be fixed. But people who did enter illegally and are breaking laws don't deserve who fail to assimilate. They don't deserve these kind of benefits. They're harming our society. And a welcoming city, what they do is they'll go to your local town council and get the local left-leaning person on council to push this agenda to make your little town a welcoming community. We're a certified welcoming community. That sounds really friendly. Well, there's a patchwork all over the nation of welcoming, or again, sanctuary cities. And these little towns become counties, become states. So the welcoming attitude is spreading across the country, sounding nice, but it's that's how this idea of sanctuaries is spreading, not shrinking, even during the Trump administration, because there's a bunch of leftists out there pushing this agenda to your local city council or county board.
Pam, not Pam.
Okay.
I'm saying Pam because we have breaking news about Pam Bondi, which I'll say in just a minute.
Mm-hmm.
But Beth, the what you were just saying is really important, and I think that it's very important for people to go to restoration-news.com and read the article that you have written and link through and understand what these welcoming cities and this welcoming America nonprofit is doing. And as Beth just said, it is a code word for sanctuary cities. Yeah. Beth, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Back on my show sometime soon.
Love to. Thanks so much, Jenny Beth.
Okay. Next, we are about to go to a promo. And when we come back from the promo, we'll have a little bit more about this. But there is breaking news, and the Wall Street Journal is reporting that Attorney General Pam Bondi is out as Attorney General. Right now, we are going to a quick promo, and we will be right back with more on Pam Bondi and Rachel Bovard. So welcome back. Thanks for staying with us today on the Jenny Beth Show. And we're about to go to Rachel Bovard, who is the Vice President of Programs for the Conservative Partnership Institute. And I'm going to go a little bit off script today and then come back to what we intended to talk about with Rachel. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that Pam Bondi has been ousted as Attorney General, and the top paragraph says President Trump has ousted Attorney General Pam Bondi, according to a person with direct knowledge of the matter, ending a year-long tenure atop the Justice Department marked by, and this is the Wall Street Journal, by failed efforts to prosecute his favored targets and a view by the president and his advisors that she mismanaged the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. Rachel, thank you so much for joining me today. And before we get into the SAVE Act and DHS, what do you think of this news about Pam Bondi?
It was, rumored that it was coming. And it's interesting to see the timing is the day after the birthright citizenship case was argued in front of the Supreme Court, maybe potentially suggesting, President Trump felt she mishandled that case in addition to some other things. But, this is the president's prerogative. The department will now be in the capable hands of the the Associate Attorney General, Todd Blanche. And, he can serve in that position for a little while. He's capped statutorily by the Vacancy Act until he has to be confirmed again in that position. So either he will be sitting in that position, or the president will nominate someone new, or potentially move over another one of his cabinet heads, as we've seen him do prior. So never a boring day in Washington.
Absolutely not. And President Trump certainly keeps us on our toes. On Monday, Cleta Mitchell joined us, breaking down the Save America Act fight. So if the audience missed that, please make sure you go back and watch that conversation. We'll have a link at the end of the show today. Rachel, you are an expert when it comes to Senate policy and procedure. And last Thursday, we saw some interesting things happen in the Senate with maneuvers and sort of unanimous consent. And then last night, we saw that Speaker Johnson released a statement, and there is a Thune-Johnson two-track deal that funds the Department of Homeland Security, most of it now, but it leaves the ICE and Custom and Border Patrol functions left for the reconciliation bill with apparently a June 1st deadline. You know Senate procedure better than just about anyone. I want you to comment on everything that's going down related to the Department of Homeland Security funding. Before you do, let's just watch this very quick clip from last Thursday night. Hopefully. My team is okay. All right, we'll come back to it. So the clip was, it didn't, for whatever reason, we had a little bit of issue with it, but the clip was basically the gaveling in of the session and moving through all these procedures very, very quickly and then out. And within just a few minutes, the Senate had passed a deal. Can you explain exactly what happened then and what this new deal is?
Yeah, so interestingly, it's been reported, the Senate passed this by unanimous consent, which is not actually true. The substitute was adopted. So the Senate swapped out the House deal with their own language. That was the substitute amendment. That was adopted by unanimous consent, meaning all 100 senators are presumed to consent to it unless somebody shows up to object. Nobody did. So the substitute amendment, the Senate deal, was adopted by unanimous consent. But then to pass the legislation, John Thune went to the Senate floor and said the words, "I know of no further debate," which is ironically the way a talking filibuster would end as well. "I know of no further debate." And the chair says, is there objection? Is there any other debate? Seeing none, he passes the bill by a voice vote. So this was not a unanimous consent exercise. This was a voice vote. Now, what could if any senator, if they wanted to have done, they could have come to the floor and said, "I have further debate." And they could have demanded, they could have given their speech and delayed the vote, or they simply could have requested that the vote be recorded, which is what we're used to seeing, right? Everybody coming to the floor and casting their votes. But that is how the Senate bill was passed early that morning. I think it was like 2 a.m. Now, based on the reporting that we've seen, the contours of that deal were shared with senators around roughly 8 o'clock that evening. There was no text, but allegedly, or at least if reporting is to be believed, John Thune and his office and his staff shared the broad contours of what was going to be agreed to with the senators. The deal, the text of the deal, was then hotlined around 1 a.m. And the hotline is this internal communication mechanism by which bills are sent to all 100 senators. The Republicans have a hotline, the Democrats have a hotline. And at that point, they were making sure that any senator who wanted to object could have, or called in an objection at that point, or raised a concern. Because I assume they did not get anything, John Thune went to the floor and passed the bill.
And then what happened with this deal that we saw Speaker Johnson writing about yesterday?
So the House, instead of just standing up and saluting and passing the Senate bill, they instead passed full funding of DHS. They said, no, we're not going to do this dance where we partially fund, because what the Senate deal had done was it partially funded the Department of Homeland Security absent ICE funding. The idea being, well, we'll fund the Department of Homeland Security and we'll deal with ICE in reconciliation at a later date. The House did not want to take that vote. And so they passed full funding and they said, here you go, Senate. And then they went home. But since that time, there has been, a back and forth negotiation in Washington between the members. They appear to have come to some sort of agreement. John Thune went to the Senate floor during the pro forma session this morning. He tabled, meaning he voted to kill by voice vote, what the House had sent over. And the understanding is that at some point, the House will return, potentially at the end of their recess in 2 weeks, and pass what the Senate has done. But until they do that, DHS remains technically unfunded. Now, we've seen several executive actions from the White House. Donald Trump has said he will use his executive authority to pay TSA agents, and he will continue to fund ICE and immigration enforcement activities through the previous reconciliation bill, which has a large but limited pot of money for ICE. And so he will continue to pay them out of that pot of money until potentially the Congress agrees to do a second reconciliation bill to fund specifically ICE.
When it comes to ICE, with what he has available to fund right now based on breaking it out of the Department of Homeland Security and potentially putting it into reconciliation, are the administrative functions in the in ICE and the in Immigration and Custom Enforcement actually being funded right now? Is it just agents, or are there other people who are going to be funded? And are those other people working, or are they furloughed?
DHS is almost exclusively essential employees, is my understanding. So a lot of these current DHS employees are working without pay. But the current ICE and CBP and a lot of enforcement activities, a lot of that, the funding for those activities was done through the previous reconciliation bill. So the One Big Beautiful Bill contained within it a fairly large pot of money for ICE, for enforcement, for beds, for all the things that you need to do that. Now, it's unfortunate because I think they were trying to, build on top of what they expected would be further discretionary appropriations. They didn't get that, right? So they're now spending down that money from the reconciliation pot in a far more expedited way than they were originally planning. So it may be, and I think the plan is at this point for Congress to revisit the reconciliation process and again juice up that funding for ICE and CBP through the reconciliation.
Okay, that is helpful. It may still be as clear as mud to some people because some of what Congress does is just, it isn't that what you just described is not helpful. It is, and it clears things up. But the reasoning behind why they're doing this, the unwillingness to fight, and the seeming, it's hard to look at this deal and think, okay, well, the Republicans did not just cave to the Democrats' demands. The Democrats fight with everything they have, and President Trump does as well. We really need to see more of that coming out of the United States Senate. And let's shift gears just a little bit, talking about needing to fight with everything you have. The Save America Act, 87% of Americans support voter ID. Over 80% of Americans support proof of citizenship to register to vote. And yet the Republicans they didn't do the full talking filibuster. The quasi talking filibuster is probably going to die when the Republicans come back in a week from Monday. And then we have the reconciliation path that many Republican senators were talking about. But Senator Mike Lee is warning us that the Byrd rule is going to make that not be viable. So what do you see the best path for getting this passed before November?
So I think the Senate has to decide they want to pass the bill and not just talk about it being on the Senate floor, because bringing it to the floor is the first step, right? And we've seen John Thune do that. He didn't do it in a way that he's enforcing a talking filibuster. He chose not to do that. So he's got the amendment tree full, and this is the pending business of the Senate, assuming the Senate returns to it. So at this point, since he's not doing a talking filibuster, at some point he's going to have to invoke cloture on the bill. How do you intend to get Democrats to cross over? Now, we saw within a day of this bill being on the floor, you saw Chuck Schumer and Dick Durbin say, oh, well, we're fine with voter ID. Oh, really? That's interesting. Is any Republican talking to them about the contours of what that would look like? Is it possible that you could get a group of senators that are interested in engaging them on this question? Because you don't need all of the Democrats to vote with you. You just need a few. And so I think the process needs to be working out these concerns. This is what the Senate is for. When we say deliberation, this is what we mean. We don't just mean talking on the Senate floor. We mean actively trying to come up with a compromise deal, putting on the floor, seeing how many votes it gets. If it doesn't get enough, revisiting it, trying some, new alternatives, creating new recipes of what people can agree to. That is what the deliberative environment demands. And the Senate has just lost the ability to do that. And so we're saying, please try. Right? Just don't go to the floor and talk. Please try to pass this bill. And it may be, right, because the Senate has other deadlines coming up. They have to reauthorize FISA. They have to do all these things. Okay, it may be that you continue to work off the floor on this bill with the intent of bringing the bill back to, further this negotiation at some future date. But this idea that we've just put the bill on the floor, everybody's made speeches, we're going to file cloture, it's going to fail, and then we're going to shrug and move on. That's not what we've been asking for, right? We've been asking for a big deliberative process to try and pass this bill. And so far, that's not what we've seen in terms of, senators trying to actually work together.
When it comes to the Byrd rule and reconciliation, would you explain that and break that down for people, and why you and Senator Lee and Cleta and I have all been warning that is not a viable option?
So the Byrd rule governs the budget reconciliation process. And the very simple way of understanding it is it just requires that all provisions contained in reconciliation, they must be budgetary. Okay, so if there is a policy impact, the budgetary impact of that change must outweigh the policy impact to a significant degree. This is, again, designed to keep reconciliation budget focused, because you can imagine if you could just put anything into reconciliation, you'd basically be nuking the filibuster at that point, because reconciliation is privileged. It only needs 51 votes to pass. So if we could put everything in there, what's the point of having the filibuster at that point? So it's designed to focus the process on exclusively budgetary matters. Now, there's a little wiggle room on the edges, right? You can argue your case that what you're trying to do is budgetary, but it's difficult. And the concern here is that nobody has actually laid out the case for how you would make the Save America Act reconcilable. We've seen a lot of senators say, well, let's just put it into reconciliation. That's very different than saying, how is this going to survive the Byrd rule? What is the case for how this meets the tenets of the Byrd rule? And I've had a lot of experience with the Byrd rule, because I've spent a lot of my career trying to get things into reconciliation. And it's very difficult to maneuver in there. And if you're going to create a pot of money, for instance, to incentivize states to do it, a lot of times that pot of money has to be voluntary. Right. And I don't think people who want the Save America Act to pass are going to be satisfied with just a pot of money that states can get for enforcing voter ID, because you can imagine the red states will do it. The blue states will continue not to do it. So there's no enforcement mechanism. And so we are simply saying reconciliation is a vehicle, but we don't really think it's the appropriate vehicle to encompass all of what the Save America Act is trying to do. And especially it's not appropriate to be talking about it when the bill is on the Senate floor. Right? The bill is on the floor right now. How about we try and pass the bill before we think about a million ways to put a camel through the eye of a needle, which is what reconciliation is.
Okay, I think that's really important. So it's on the floor. We want it to stay on the floor, even if it's we sort of have to press pause on it and go to FISA. They kind of press pause on it to go to the DHS funding. If they have to do that and come back to it, we understand that, but we want them to make a real effort to pass the Save America Act. So what, Rachel, do you recommend people say when they call the Senate offices?
I think, continue to ask them, when are you going to pass this bill and how are you going to pass it? Are you still working on it? Right? Because I think there's an expectation that people will just give the Senate credit for debating the bill. And yes, there is credit due for bringing it to the floor, right? Floor time in the Senate is a precious commodity. So we appreciate the fact that John Thune made the decision to give the Save America Act some floor time. But now it's on the floor. Try and pass the bill. How is the negotiation going? Have you reached out to Democrats? Is there a group of senators that are talking about what possible compromise language could look like? All of these things are what we expect to see next. If we move off the bill to FISA, when are we bringing it back up? It's about prioritization, right? The Senate makes time for what it prioritizes. And that is what we want to see with regard to the Save America Act.
Okay, folks, so that is the kind of call you need to be making to your senators' offices and impress them, ask intelligent questions, listen to the answers, and let them know you expect them to legislate on this bill and work to get to 60 votes so it can end cloture and get to a final vote. Rachel Bovard, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Jenny Beth.
Make sure you follow Rachel on X at Rachel Bovard. So it's at Rachel Bovard. And also go to passthesaveamericaact.com right now and call your senator and send emails to your senator. We're going to take a short break and then Noah Wall is next. Welcome back. Noah Wall joins me now. Noah is the president and founder of the State Leadership Initiative and also part of the newly formed Mass Deportation Coalition. Noah, thanks so much for joining me today.
I am so grateful to be on. Thanks for having me, Jenny Beth.
So, Noah, I want to talk to you about what happened at the Supreme Court yesterday and then about this Mass Deportation Coalition. Yesterday, the president walked into the Supreme Court chamber. He was the first sitting president in American history to attend oral arguments. He watched justices challenging his own executive order on birthright citizenship. From the perspective of someone who works with state legislators every day, what does this moment mean? And what does it mean for states if the Supreme Court strikes down his executive order?
No, I think that's a really good way to frame it. The issue at hand and the issue before the Supreme Court at the end of the day, and I think this is how people in the United States see this across the board. This is about whether or not the Supreme Court is upholding law or whether the Supreme Court is, reflecting what various special interests in Washington, D.C. want. There's very little question, the Solicitor General's arguments. He made a very clear and compelling case rooted in, the history of this country, the history of common law. This is, the issue of birthright citizenship has been a politicization of what, the founders originally intended and what the passers of the legislation sort of underlying that really wanted. And so what we are going to see right now is whether or not there are 5 or more Supreme Court justices willing to uphold the Constitution, or whether they're going to go ahead and make a political ruling based off of, the whims of the current culture. I think that what we need to see, and what President Trump was trying to send a signal, is the weight that is on them is almost unprecedented. If this ruling were to go the way that it should, I think that it really could drive life into the base, into the grassroots of America, and show them that the Constitution still means something.
President Trump sat there, and it made history yesterday. And there are people online and leftists who are saying he's interfering with the judicial branch. But perhaps what he was actually doing was sitting in that courtroom and saying, I am representing the majority of the American people, the citizens of the United States of America who elected me. He's the only person in the country right now who can say he was elected by the only sitting elected official elected by all Americans. And this case, really at the heart of it, is defining who actually is a citizen and what the Constitution means. The conservative legal argument is that subject to the jurisdiction thereof, and the 14th Amendment requires allegiance and domicile, not just physical presence on American soil. And Chief Justice Roberts seems skeptical. He said, and I'm quoting from the oral arguments, "It's a new world and it's the same Constitution." I want you to walk us through that, but before you do, yesterday my team and I were talking about this, and one of the members of my team said, the founding fathers could never have imagined airplane travel that would get people from one country into ours within hours from anywhere in the world. Maybe you know, it could be 18, 20 hours, depending on where you're coming from. But within just a few short hours, you're going to be in America, and you have plane loads of people. They never imagined that would happen, that people would just be here, they'd turn around and leave. Like when you came to America during the founding, you made a months-long journey to get here, and you did it because you intended to settle and to be part of this country. It wasn't just so you could pass through, have a baby, and then let your baby be called an American citizen. I'm kind of on a soapbox about it because Justice Roberts' comments alarm me. So walk our viewers through what a loss of the Supreme Court means practically, and does it go back to Congress? Is there anything states can do?
Yeah, so I think that this is really important. Back when, the United States has faced waves of migration and immigration throughout its history, and the history of the United States has been the history of people coming, making a huge sacrifice to get here. It is only in the last 50, 60 years where people have been able to take a $500 airplane ride, show up, and then, basically just be able to be here. It was a massive sacrifice to be here, in the founding all the way through the advent of air travel. And what most people don't, discuss and don't talk about is the fact that throughout our history, huge portions of the people who came here left. They came here, they tried to make it work, weren't able to make it work, and they turned around and left. They didn't do it out of a whim. They made a bet on their future and the future of their families. And once they got here, it was not some easy matter. They didn't go back home to visit. So, in one respect, it is different now. In that, that it's both easy to get here, it's easy to return, it's easy to maintain ties and communications with, the old world, as it were, that you never really had prior to, the last 50, 75 years. But what I think is truly, something that is rooted in law in the United States, something that is rooted in, in American history and throughout the common law period, is that, being an American meant something, it meant something more than just showing up. It required a sacrifice. It was not all, you moving to the frontier, you're moving to a big city where there were no social safety nets. It is an entirely different world at this point. And the economic factors that are going into migration are something that, that are facilitating this migration. And during the Biden era and during the Obama era as well, you had the federal government actually going and doing advertising campaigns, trying to get people to move to the United States for economic reasons. And, that is in fact new, but the history and the common law associated with, being a natural born citizen and what that actually meant throughout history was, that is what is truly unchanged and what the Supreme Court has an opportunity to do. If this gets struck down, I think it is a massive blow to the spirit of the activists of America. I think it demonstrates something broken at the Supreme Court. But what we need to demonstrate, and what I think the people of America want to show, is that this country is set up. We are a nation of laws, and I think that it's almost exactly what is at stake, is whether or not this country is a nation of laws, a nation that has rules and processes that people have to follow. And there have been just over the last 12 months, incredible work done demonstrating that Chinese Communist Party officials are at scale manipulating this, having babies born here and then taken back to China. And I mean, we're talking like 7 figures worth of such type of migrants over the last 20 years. These are not, those type of situations were not foreseen. They were not possible economically, and there was no reason to do it. But what we need to see now is a Supreme Court that is not holding the Constitution or, individual laws as a suicide pact. This is very much a situation where we need the Supreme Court to stand up for Americans. And I believe that states will. I think there's a lot of options for states to kind of pick up the slack if they don't, the Supreme Court doesn't do it.
Noah, you're also a member of the Mass Deportation Coalition, and people can go to the website for that at massdeportationcoalition.org. O-R-G. And the coalition released a 100-page, well, it's actually, I think, 104-page Phase 2 Playbook this week, calling worksite enforcement the most critical missing policy for the Trump administration right now. The coalition says the criminal-only, worst of the worst approach has hit an operational ceiling. What does Phase 2 actually mean, and why does it matter for how does this ICE not being funded right now as part of the DHS funding bill, what do you think of that, and how does it affect what's going on with immigration enforcement and deportation?
Yeah, so the idea behind the Mass Deportation Coalition is that President Trump campaigned on and was elected to enact the largest mass deportation in history. This was, these are famously signs that were held at the Republican National Committee, at the convention in 2024. These were something that the President Trump's campaign leaned into as a popular way in the general election of 2024. There was a reason that they did that. Mass deportations and upholding, our nation's laws with respect to who's here and who's not, that is a political position that is popular. So the goal of the Mass Deportation Coalition is to reignite the spirit that President Trump campaigned on in 2024 to demonstrate that those values are not something that you need to shy away from in the midterm elections. These are actually something that you can lean into and have political support for. So the idea is, last year the Trump administration deported something like 350,000 people. We know that the self-deportation numbers, there's a lot of discussion what those are, but at the end of the day, the only way to get those numbers to where, to get in the ballpark of what it is that, he campaigned on is to actually take, the actions that we line out in the playbook. It's not super complicated. And in fact, you can do it in ways that don't get media attention. Things like worksite enforcement, things like, leaning into the 287G program. These are all things that President Trump campaigned on. The coalition is demonstrating that these are popular. We've got poll numbers that you can get on that website that show that the vast majority of Americans, including, by the way, the majority of Hispanic Americans, agree with. So these are things that are not something that the administration should feel any pressure to shy away from. It's not something Congress should shy away from. And the fact that we have the ICE being defunded, it is having an impact for sure. And there's no reason that we need to be going through this. The American people need to see that when they grant Congress when they give Congress both houses to Republicans and they have an elected president, they need to see that we're able to function as a group, as a body, and fund the critical elements of the Trump administration's agenda.
I completely agree with you on that, Noah. And you just mentioned the polling that your Mass Deportation Coalition released a McLaughlin and Associates poll showing 66% of likely 2026 voters support deporting any migrant who entered illegally, not just criminals. 72% support employer audits. Does that polling change the political calculation for Republicans who are still reluctant to go beyond criminal enforcement?
It really needs to. And the point being, this isn't just theory. President Trump's campaign, in a truly unprecedented manner, campaigned on this in the general election. This is usually an issue that people only talk about in the primary, and in the general election, they back away from. President Trump's campaign in 2024 made the conscious decision to lean into this issue because both, I believe it's something that Trump has always believed in, but also because it is politically popular. That did not change because of anything, anything that has happened over the last year. There was a ton of media publicity over what happened in Minneapolis and in other, cities around the country. This poll that we did with McLaughlin and Associates was after the Minneapolis, situation happened. The polling began not all that long after that was very much in the news. And so the point being, that did not change how people believe, support these issues. And we were very specific. You can go item after item in that poll shows that every single action that, this coalition is supporting shows broad support amongst the electorate. And it is not, it's not something that's changed recently. It's not something that we need to worry about at all in a lower turnout midterm election. We should be leaning into this, not away from it.
You're exactly right. And the Republicans campaigned on this in 2024. And we want the politicians to keep their promises once they are actually elected. And we've done polling on it at Tea Party Patriots Action. Rosemary Jinks has done polling on it separate from the Mass Deportation Coalition. And all of us are getting the same results over and over. People do want to deport the people Americans want to deport the people who entered the country illegally. I think what's happening right now is that the squeaky wheel is getting all the grease. And the squeaky wheel is the mainstream media and the leftists trying to make it seem like they're the norm and they're the majority, but they're really out of touch with what with what the coalition has found, with what Rosemary's organization has found, with what our organization has found. We all are doing this polling. Perhaps we're talking about it differently than the mainstream media, but then the politicians should look at this, the elected officials should look at how we're talking about it and go talk to their constituency the same way, because our messaging works.
Yeah, so you're 100% right on that. And something that I would add to it that I think is an incredibly important part of this. The American people who believe these things, these are not angry, bitter, portions of the electorate that are, mean-spirited in any way. The American people who believe this, your activists at Tea Party Patriots, the conservative activist base of America are the kindest, good-hearted people I believe, of any population of any country in the history of the world. These are good people who want what's best for their country. The fact that they are demanding this is a reflection of the fact that Main Street in Washington, D.C. has been, they'll campaign on this issue, they'll make promises, but they always break those promises. And I think the anger that the activists have on this is directed at them. It is directed at the people who make these promises and every single election cycle back away from them. And that's what needs to change. The American people are, they have a generosity of spirit that is unprecedented in the history of the world. And I think that this is a reflection of them wanting to save their country. That's what this is about.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I had a dinner last night with some friends who are not super politically active. Of course, politics came up because it's what I do, so they're familiar with it. And they were expressing basically the same sentiment that you just said. They want politicians to keep their promises. It's that simple. Noah, before we let you go, you're the president of the State Leadership Initiative. I want to make sure I have your organization's name right. The State Leadership Initiative. We did not really talk about your work with that today. You do amazing work, and just highlight a couple of the things you've done recently. And then now that I'm doing this show daily and live 3 days a week, I'd love to make sure we get you to come back to talk about your work with the State Leadership Initiative and to break down news of the day like we're doing today.
I would love to. So the State Leadership Initiative, we're focused on the premise that Republican states, the voters of these states are very clear with the type of governance that they want. They want small government. They want constitutional freedoms. They want to have a lean government with, low bureaucracy count, low regulations. That is what they vote for and what they are promised every single campaign cycle. What they get in Republican states, almost across the board, Governor DeSantis is I think, the absolute baseline of what conservatives should expect from governance on the state level, but they are almost always let down. And the State Leadership Initiative was founded on the premise that Republican states can do better, and we're trying to remove those blocks to help governors and help state legislatures actually govern the way that they campaign on and govern the way that they promise the voters. I think most of these people want to do the right thing, but there's a lot of structural factors making it difficult to do that. So we do the hard work of trying to figure out where those roadblocks are, help remove them, and provide the leadership that these states need to be able to actually change how it is that they govern in these states. And so, we've been working with Governor Braun, Governor Morrissey, in West Virginia, Indiana, to help, enact government reform legislation, where they've passed, just 2 sweeping bills just in the last couple of months, working with Governor, DeSantis in Florida to try and do the same thing there. There's a massive amount of opportunity to change how these red states are governed and to deliver, the free market, conservative governance that these people want. And there's a lot of reasons, every state has a swamp, there's a lot of reasons why this doesn't happen. We want to remove those roadblocks.
Very good. Thank you so much, Noah. And for more information about what Noah is doing with the State Leadership Initiative, you can go to stateleadership.org. And for the Mass Deportation Coalition, it's massdeportationcoalition.org. Make sure you go read that playbook. Noah, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me on, Jenny Beth.
Last night, President Trump addressed the nation from the Oval Office. He said Iran's Navy is, quote, gone. He said that Iran's Air Force is, quote, in ruins. He said the objectives of Operation Epic Fury are, quote, nearing completion. Here are the numbers. More than 11,000 targets struck. More than 150 Iranian vessels sunk. 92% of Iran's largest naval vessels are destroyed. Ballistic missile attacks against American and allied forces are down 90%. More than 66% of Iranian missile and drone production facilities have been damaged or destroyed. And 13 American service members have given their lives. These are men and women who chose to stand between America and a regime that has been killing Americans for decades. They deserve to be honored. The Trump administration has announced a 10-day pause on strikes against Iranian power infrastructure while negotiations continue. This is not a ceasefire. This is a negotiating posture backed by overwhelming military strength. This is what American strength looks like. Not apology tours, not pallets of cash, strength. And the president walked into the Supreme Court chamber yesterday. He sat down 6 feet from the ACLU lawyers arguing against his own executive order. The question before the court is whether the Constitution means what it says, specifically whether the words subject to the jurisdiction thereof and the 14th Amendment require allegiance and domicile, or whether physical presence on American soil at the moment of birth is enough. Here's what I believe. The 14th Amendment was written for children of freed slaves, for people who have been denied citizenship for generations on American soil. It was not written for the children of people who broke our laws to get here. That is not a settled question in the courtroom, but it is a settled question for me. If the Supreme Court rules the wrong way this summer, then we have to make sure that Congress fights and we continue to fight back. And that is exactly why the Save America Act matters so much, because election integrity and immigration enforcement are the same fight. You cannot secure the border and then hand ballots to people who cross the border illegally. In the middle of all of this, the conflict with Iran, the constitutional fight at the Supreme Court, a Department of Homeland Security shutdown entering its 7th week, 4 American astronauts are further from Earth right now than any human beings have ever traveled. Artemis 2, they launched and they are out there. I do not think it is a coincidence that America fights its hardest when it reaches its highest. The United States is a country that sends explorers to the edge of the known universe. Let's take a look at this amazing. So we've got up on the screen right now the launch and the official footage from the launch, but let's take a quick look at this amazing view one group had yesterday. What an amazing view. I am so jealous of the people on that plane. The America those astronauts are flying away from deserves to be protected. Protected borders, protected elections, protected by the people who serve and sacrifice. And that is exactly why what I'm about to ask you to do matters. Now stay with me. This is what I need you to do right now. Go to passthesaveamericaact.com. That address is on your screen right now. Write it down. But if you're listening on a podcast platform, it is passthesaveamericaact.com. The Save America Act requires proof of citizenship to register to vote in federal elections and requires voter ID to vote. 87% of Americans support it. 92% of Republicans, 73% of Democrats, 82% of independents. It has passed the House and it is stuck in the Senate, and we need your help to get it through. Congress comes back on April 13th. That is 11 days from today, and we need to light the phone lines up. The number for the United States Senate is 202-224-3121, 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. Call them, tell them to pass the Save America Act and to ensure that we require proof of citizenship to register to vote and voter ID when we cast those ballots. Do it now. Tell them they need to pass this before the midterm. The only obstacle right now is the willingness to do what the American voters want. You are their constituents. You have the power. Pass the SaveAmericaAct.com. Go there right now. Call now. Your call and your voice matter. Thank you so much for spending this hour with us. And if you missed yesterday's show, I'm putting that link up on the screen right now. Watch it and share it. New episodes every single day at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. You can subscribe on YouTube, follow us on Rumble, and find me on X at Jenny Beth M. And remember, pass the SaveAmericaAct.com. Make those calls right now. If you enjoyed today's conversation, go ahead and hit like and subscribe. It really helps us reach more people who care about liberty and the Constitution. You can find this and other episodes at jennybethshow.com, as well as Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, Instagram, X, and your favorite podcast platform.
The Jenny Beth Show is hosted by Jenny Beth Martin. The Jenny Beth Show is a production of Tea Party Patriots Action. For more information, visit teapartypatriots.org.